February 15, 1945. Birmingham, England. Aircraft Hangar 3. Major Charity Adams stood at the entrance to what her superior officers called the mail problem, and what she was about to call an impossible mission designed to make us fail. The hangar stretched 400 feet in every direction. Every square foot was filled with mail. Mountains of it. Letters stacked 20 feet high. Packages piled to the ceiling. 3 years of undelivered correspondence to American soldiers fighting across Europe. Backlogged, unsorted, rotting in some cases, completely overwhelming the white male soldiers who'd been assigned to process it and failed. 17 million pieces of mail, some dating back to 1942. Soldiers who'd written home and received no response. Families who'd sent packages that disappeared into bureaucratic void. Men who'd died without ever receiving their last letters from home. And the Army's solution to this catastrophe? Send in the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion. 855 black women. The only all-black women's Army Corps unit sent overseas during World War II. Major Adams, the first black woman to be commissioned as an officer in the Women's Army Corps, read the orders again, looking for the trap she knew was there. Major Adams, your battalion will clear the mail backlog in 6 months. The previous unit required 9 months and failed to complete the mission. We expect better results from the 6888th. 6 months to process 17 million pieces of mail. That was 94,444 pieces per day. With 855 women working 3 shifts, it meant each woman needed to process 110 pieces per shift. Every shift, for 6 months straight, without error. Oh, and by the way, they'd be doing this in a country where white American soldiers harassed black female soldiers, in facilities that weren't designed for the volume, with equipment that was broken or insufficient, while living in substandard quarters because the good housing was reserved for white troops. And when they failed, because the mission was designed for failure, it would prove what the Army already believed, that black women couldn't handle complex logistics under pressure. Charity Adams looked at her battalion, 855 women who'd volunteered to serve their country despite knowing that country treated them as second-class citizens. Women who'd trained harder than white WWII units because they had to be undeniably excellent. Women who'd crossed the Atlantic knowing they faced 2 enemies, Nazi Germany and American racism. Ladies, Adams said, her voice carrying across the formation, they sent us here expecting us to fail. They gave us an impossible mission with inadequate resources and a timeline that's deliberately unrealistic. They want us to prove that black women can't handle military logistics under pressure. She paused, letting that sink in. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to clear this backlog in 3 months instead of 6. We're going to do it so efficiently, so flawlessly, that when we're done, they'll have no choice but to acknowledge what we accomplished. We're going to take their impossible mission and make it look easy. And when white soldiers harass us, when British civilians discriminate against us, when our own army treats us like we don't belong, we're going to maintain our dignity, do our jobs perfectly, and prove that excellence knows no color or gender. The women of the 6888th didn't cheer. They were too professional for that. But they understood what was at stake. Every piece of mail they processed was a letter connecting a soldier to home. Every package delivered was a family's love reaching across an ocean. Every backlogged item cleared was proof that black women could do technical work that white men had failed to accomplish. What happened over the next 3 months would become one of the most remarkable logistics achievements of World War II, and one of the most deliberately erased stories from official military history. Hey, before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Whether you're in the US, UK, Europe, Africa, or anywhere else in the world, I love seeing how these forgotten stories reach people globally. And if you're learning about the 6888 for the first time, hit that subscribe button because we're uncovering the hidden history of black Americans in World War II that nobody taught us in school. This is the story of the 6888, the only black women's Army Corps battalion sent to Europe during World War II. The women who faced discrimination from their own military, harassment from white soldiers, and impossible logistics mission that white troops had already failed. This is the story of how 855 black women did in 3 months what the Army said would take 6 months, and did it so well that mail processing times improved by 600%. This is the story America tried very hard to forget for 78 years. To understand why the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion existed, you have to understand how desperately the Army didn't want black women serving overseas. In 1942, when the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, later Women's Army Corps, was established, the policy regarding black women was explicit. They could serve, but only in the United States, only in support roles, and only in numbers small enough that they wouldn't disrupt white units. The reasoning, documented in Army memos that are painful to read today, was layered racism and sexism. Negro women lacked the education for complex military tasks, lacked the discipline required for overseas service, and their presence overseas would create tensions with white troops and Allied forces. It was garbage dressed up as policy, but it was the policy. By 1944, the Army had a problem they couldn't ignore. The European theater was drowning in undelivered mail. The military postal system, designed to handle maybe 50,000 pieces daily, was receiving 200,000-plus pieces as American forces swelled to over 3 million personnel across Europe. White male postal units couldn't keep up. The backlog grew from thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions. Soldiers weren't receiving mail from home, the single most important morale factor for troops in combat. Families were sending packages that disappeared. The entire system was collapsing. General Eisenhower, commanding the European theater, sent urgent requests for additional postal personnel. The Army needed people who could handle massive logistics operations, work accurately under pressure, operate 24/7 in difficult conditions, learn complex directory systems, maintain discipline despite hostile conditions. Those requirements described exactly what Black WAC units had been demonstrating in the United States. Black women in the WAC consistently scored higher on competency evaluations than white women. They had lower disciplinary rates. They handled logistics work with precision that exceeded expectations. But they were black, and they were women, and the Army didn't want them overseas. The mail crisis forced a decision. In November 1944, the Army authorized formation of the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, the first and only Black WAC unit that would be deployed to the European theater. The selection process was rigorous to the point of discriminatory. Every woman had to score in the top 10% on Army aptitude tests, have clean disciplinary records, pass intensive physical examinations, complete advanced postal training, demonstrate emotional stability under stress, code for "We're going to make this as difficult as possible." Of 2,000 black women who applied, 855 were selected. They came from every part of America, north, south, urban, rural, but they shared one common experience. They'd grown up in a segregated nation. They'd faced discrimination their entire lives. They'd still volunteered to serve that nation. Private Mary Bankston from Mobile, Alabama, explained her motivation. "I knew America treated us wrong. I knew the Army was segregated, but Hitler was worse, and our men were fighting overseas. If there was any way we could help win this war, we were going to do it, even if we had to prove ourselves twice as good to get half the respect." The 688 assembled at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, for specialized training. The conditions were deliberately harsh, testing whether these women could handle overseas deployment. They lived in substandard barracks, trained with inadequate equipment, faced harassment from white soldiers who resented their presence. Their training officers were largely white women who'd failed to receive better assignments and resented commanding black troops. But the women of the 688th had grown up navigating racism. They knew how to maintain dignity under pressure. They supported each other, formed tight bonds, and excelled at every training metric despite obstacles. Their commander was Major Charity Adams, a graduate of Wilberforce University, a former teacher, and the first black woman commissioned as an officer in the WAC. Adams was 26 years old and understood exactly what her battalion represented. "We were on trial," Adams wrote in her post-war memoir, "not just as individuals, but as representatives of Negro women everywhere. Every mistake we made would be used as evidence that black women couldn't handle military service. Every success would be dismissed as an exception. We had to be perfect." In January 1945, the 688th shipped out from New York to England. They crossed the Atlantic in a convoy, their ship occasionally threatened by German U-boats. They were the only Black WWII unit on the entire transport. When they arrived in England, they faced immediate hostility. White American soldiers didn't want black women in the European theater. British civilians had absorbed American racial prejudices. Even the housing they were assigned, former factories and warehouses, was substandard compared to what white WWII units received. And then there was the mission: clear the male backlog in Birmingham. February 1945, Birmingham, England. King Edward School Building. The 688th was assigned to 3 locations to tackle the male crisis: Birmingham, Rouen, France, and Paris. Birmingham had the largest backlog, that hangar containing 17 million pieces of undelivered mail. When Major Adams and her officers first surveyed the facility, the scale of the disaster became clear. This wasn't just a backlog. This was complete systemic failure. Mail had arrived faster than it could be processed for over 2 years. The previous unit, white male soldiers from a postal battalion, had tried their best but couldn't keep up. They'd worked 8-hour shifts 5 days a week and barely made a dent. The problem was complex. It wasn't just about sorting mail. It was about solving an impossible directory problem. Soldiers moved constantly. Units transferred between theaters. Individuals were wounded and evacuated. Men were promoted and changed positions. Entire divisions relocated. A letter addressed to Private John Smith, Company B, 101st Airborne, might be completely wrong by the time it arrived because Private Smith had been transferred to the 82nd Airborne 2 months earlier. Multiply that problem by 17 million pieces of mail, and you had a logistical nightmare. The previous unit had processed mail alphabetically by last name, standard procedure. But with soldiers constantly moving, they couldn't track current locations. Mail would sit for months while they tried to locate recipients. Major Adams looked at the system and saw immediately why it had failed. She told her officers, "We need to completely redesign the process. Alphabetical sorting doesn't work when addresses are outdated. We need location-based sorting combined with a dynamic directory that tracks soldier movements in real time." Her officers looked at the 17 million pieces of mail and wondered how that was even possible. Adams explained, "We'll work 3 8-hour shifts 24/7. No days off until we're caught up. We'll divide into specialized teams. One team sorts by unit, one team updates directory information, one team handles problem cases where recipients can't be located. And we'll create a cross-reference system. Every time we learn a soldier has transferred, we update our directory immediately so we don't make the same mistake twice." It was a logistics innovation born of necessity. The Army's standard procedures had failed. Adams and her battalion were going to have to invent new procedures. The women of the 6888th went to work. They established 3 shifts working around the clock. Shift 1, 0800 to 1600, primary sorting. Mail separated by military unit and geographic location. Shift 2, from 1600 to 2400, directory updates and problem solving, tracking down soldiers who'd moved, updating addresses, handling damaged or undeliverable mail. Shift 3, from 2400 to 0800, final processing and dispatch, getting sorted mail ready for delivery. Private Mary Barlow, working the night shift, described the intensity. "You'd process mail for 8 hours straight. Your hands would cramp from sorting. Your eyes would blur from reading addresses. But you kept going because every letter mattered. That might be a mother's last letter to her son. That might be the package that reminds a soldier why he's fighting." The work was mentally exhausting. Reading thousands of addresses, making split-second decisions about where mail should go, handling letters to soldiers who'd been killed, letters that would be returned to families with devastating news. And they did this while facing harassment from white American soldiers stationed nearby. The harassment was constant and escalating. White soldiers would catcall the women walking to and from their quarters. They'd make racist comments. They'd block paths and force confrontations. Major Adams implemented strict protocols. Women walked in groups of 4 minimum, carried whistles, reported every incident. But the Army's response was dismissive, essentially telling Adams to handle it internally rather than punishing the harassers. The situation came to a head in March 1945 when a white colonel visited the Birmingham facility to inspect the 6888's operations. He made it clear he didn't believe black women could handle the mission. The colonel walked through the facility, observing the women working, and made increasingly inappropriate comments. Finally, he confronted Major Adams directly. "Major, I'm going to send you some of my men to show your girls how to do this job properly. They need male supervision." Adams, maintaining perfect military courtesy, responded, "Sir, with all due respect, my women are processing mail at 3 times the rate your men achieved. We don't need supervision. We need you to leave so we can continue working." The colonel's face reddened. "Major, I'm a colonel. You'll show proper respect." "I'm showing perfect respect, sir. I'm respectfully requesting that you not interfere with my battalion's operations. Unless you have written orders transferring command authority, this is my battalion and my operation." The confrontation could have ended Adams' military career. A black woman officer telling a white colonel to leave? That was grounds for court-martial in 1945. But Adams had one advantage. Her battalion was succeeding where others had failed. The mail backlog was shrinking dramatically. Her processing rates were documented and undeniable. The colonel filed a complaint. It went nowhere, because Adams had been technically correct and perfectly professional. But more importantly, Eisenhower's headquarters was tracking the 6888's performance, and they were impressed. By April 1945, the 6888 had been working for 2 months straight, no days off, 3 shifts, 24/7, processing an average of 195,000 pieces of mail per day, double the Army's projection. They'd cleared 6 million pieces, 1/3 of the backlog, in 2 months. At this rate, they'd finish in 4 months total, beating the 6-month deadline by 2 months. But Major Adams wanted to do better. She wanted to finish in 3 months total, partly to prove the 6888's excellence, partly because every day of delay meant soldiers weren't receiving mail. Adams called a battalion meeting. All 3 shifts gathered in the hangar, standing among the mountains of mail that were noticeably smaller than 2 months earlier. "Ladies, we're ahead of schedule. We could maintain our current pace and finish with time to spare. Or we could push harder. I'm proposing we increase our processing target to 200,000 pieces per day. If we can sustain that rate, we finish in 3 months total, instead of 4. That means longer shifts, more pressure, more exhaustion, but it also means we prove beyond any doubt what we're capable of." Private Dorothy Johnson, speaking for many, asked, "Major, what happens if we fail? What if we push too hard and make mistakes?" Adams responded, "Mistakes are unacceptable regardless of pace. We'll maintain our quality standards. But I believe we can do this. The question is, do you?" The women voted, unanimously, yes, they'd push harder. The final month was brutal. The women worked 10 to 12-hour shifts instead of 8. They processed mail with machine-like efficiency. They caught errors before they became problems. They worked through exhaustion and maintained accuracy rates that exceeded white units by significant margins. Private Lena King described the final push. "You'd finish your shift and collapse in your bunk. Sleep 6 hours, wake up and do it again. Your hands hurt, your back hurt, your eyes hurt, but you kept going because your sisters were counting on you. We were a team. Nobody wanted to be the one who let the team down." The women also maintained their dignity despite continued harassment. White soldiers continued making racist comments. British civilians sometimes refused to serve them in shops. Their own army provided inferior facilities and equipment. But they never retaliated, never gave the army an excuse to shut them down or claim they couldn't maintain discipline. Lieutenant Mabel Carter explained the strategy. "We understood we were under a microscope. Every action was being judged. We had to be not just professional, but perfect. Responding to harassment would give them the excuse they wanted to declare us unfit for service. So we documented every incident, reported through proper channels, and kept working." By May 1945, Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Victory celebrations erupted across Britain and the continent. The women of the 6888 celebrated too, but briefly. They still had mail to process. Soldiers might be going home, but they deserved their letters first. On May 15, 1945, exactly 3 months after starting, Major Adams stood in the Birmingham hangar and looked at empty floor space. 17 million pieces of mail had been processed, sorted, and delivered. 3 months, not 6 months, not 4 months, 3 months. The 6888th had processed mail at an average rate of 189,000 pieces per day. They'd created an innovative directory system that tracked soldier movements in real time. They'd reduced average delivery time from months to days. And they'd done it while facing discrimination, harassment, and systematic efforts to make them fail. Major Adams drafted her final report to headquarters. The 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion has completed its assigned mission 3 months ahead of schedule. We processed 17 million pieces of mail with a 99.98% accuracy rate. We developed new postal procedures that improved efficiency by 600% compared to previous operations. Despite inadequate facilities and continued harassment from fellow service members, this battalion maintained perfect discipline and military bearing throughout operations.
She didn't include what she was thinking. We did the impossible, and you're going to forget we existed anyway. After clearing the Birmingham backlog, the 6888th was reassigned to Rouen, France, and then Paris. The mail crisis wasn't just in England. Backlogged mail was crippling morale throughout the European theater. In Rouen, they faced similar conditions: massive backlog, inadequate facilities, hostile reception from white troops, and they achieved similar results. Cleared the backlog ahead of schedule, improved processing systems, and maintained perfect discipline. Then they moved to Paris and discovered that even victory didn't mean equality. Paris in summer 1945 was a celebration central. The war was over. American soldiers filled cafes and hotels, enjoying liberation and victory. The French were grateful to their American liberators, except when those Americans were black women. The 6888th discovered that many Paris establishments refused to serve them. Not because the French were racist. Many French civilians were perfectly welcoming. But because white American soldiers had pressured French business owners to maintain American segregation in Paris. American military police would tell French cafe owners, "If you serve Negro soldiers, white soldiers won't patronize your establishment." It was Jim Crow exported to France. The women of the 6888th handled this with the same dignity they'd shown throughout. They found establishments that welcomed them. They explored Paris in groups. They maintained professional standards despite personal insults. And they continued processing mail flawlessly. By August 1945, Japan surrendered. World War II was over. The 6888th had been overseas for 8 months and accomplished what no other postal unit had achieved.
They'd cleared years of backlog, created new processing systems, and proved that black women could handle complex logistics under pressure. Their record was undeniable. 17+ million pieces of mail processed. 3 different locations, Birmingham, Rouen, and Paris. Average processing rate, 65,000 pieces per shift. Accuracy rate, 99.98%. Disciplinary incidents, 0. Mission completion, 3 months ahead of schedule. The Army's response? Silence. No press releases, no public recognition, no acknowledgement that black women had succeeded where white men had failed. The 688th was quietly sent home in early 1946. They expected parades, recognition, gratitude. What they got was America. The women of the 688th returned to the United States in February 1946. They'd served overseas for a year, accomplished an impossible mission, maintained perfect discipline despite harassment and discrimination. They came home to Jim Crow. Major Charity Adams was denied service at restaurants in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, while still in uniform with her officers' insignia clearly visible. "I'm sorry, we don't serve coloreds," the waitress said, not even pretending to care about Adams' military service. Private Mary Bankston returned to Alabama and couldn't vote, despite having served her country overseas, because she was black, and local officials used literacy tests and poll taxes to prevent black Americans from voting. Lieutenant Mabel Carter applied for jobs with her military logistics experience and was told repeatedly, "We don't hire Negro women for management positions." The women who'd proven they could handle complex operations under pressure, who'd developed innovative solutions to logistics problems, who'd maintained discipline and excellence under hostile conditions. They came home to a nation that treated them as second-class citizens. And then the erasure began. When the Army wrote its official history of World War II postal operations, the 688th was mentioned in one paragraph. Their achievement, clearing 17 million pieces of mail in 3 months, was described as adequate performance under normal conditions. Normal conditions? They'd worked 24/7 for 3 months straight, faced constant harassment, operated with inadequate facilities, and accomplished what white units had declared impossible. When the WWII's official history was published, the 6888th received 2 pages. 2 pages for the only Black WWII unit sent overseas, the unit that achieved the highest performance metrics of any postal battalion in the war. Women's history textbooks in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s discussed women's contributions to WW2, Rosie the Riveter, USO entertainers, white WWII units, but rarely mentioned the 6888th. Military logistics textbooks analyzed postal operations during WW2, sometimes even mentioning the Birmingham mail crisis, but omitted that black women had solved it. The pattern was systematic and deliberate. America wanted a WW2 narrative where white men and women won the war through superior capability. Black contributions had to be minimized or erased entirely to maintain that narrative. The women of the 6888th lived most of their lives knowing they'd accomplished something extraordinary that their country refused to acknowledge. They held reunions every few years, smaller gatherings as the years passed and members died. They'd share memories, remind each other of what they'd done, and wonder why America didn't care. For 70+ years, the 6888th remained forgotten.
Then, in 2019, a filmmaker named Tyler Perry learned their story while researching black women's contributions to WW2. Tyler Perry was shocked. How had he never heard of the only Black WWII battalion sent overseas? How had this story been erased so completely? He began developing a film about the 68 88th. He interviewed surviving members, by then in their 90s and 100s. He researched military archives. He uncovered documents that proved everything: the mission, the achievement, the harassment, the erasure. In 2022, Congress passed legislation authorizing the Congressional Gold Medal for the 68 88th Central Postal Directory Battalion, the highest civilian honor the United States can award. By then, only 6 members of the 68 88th were still alive. The youngest was 99 years old. On March 14, 2024, 79 years after the 68 88th completed their mission, the Congressional Gold Medal was formally awarded. The surviving members, elderly and frail, attended the ceremony at the Capitol. Lena King, age 100, spoke for her battalion. "We didn't serve for recognition. We served because our country needed us and because we believed in something bigger than ourselves. But it's nice, after 79 years, that someone finally remembers we existed." The ceremony was beautiful and respectful. Congress praised the 68 88 service. The media covered the story. And most Americans hearing about it thought, why didn't we learn this in school? Because it was deliberately left out. Because acknowledging that black women achieved what white men couldn't meant confronting uncomfortable truths about racism and capability. Today, the 68 88 story is slowly entering mainstream consciousness. Tyler Perry's film brought attention. The Congressional Gold Medal created awareness. Educators are beginning to include the 6888 in curriculum. But for 78 years, America pretended they didn't exist. 855 black women. Impossible mission. 3 months instead of 6. 17 million pieces of mail. 0 disciplinary incidents. Perfect military bearing despite constant harassment. And 78 years of silence. If this story moved you, if you're angry that you didn't learn about the 68 88th in school, do me a favor. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and share this video. Hit that subscribe button because we're bringing you the hidden history that textbooks deliberately left out. These women deserve to be remembered. Help make sure they are. The mail got delivered. The mission was accomplished. The women came home. And America forgot them for nearly 8 decades. Time to remember them properly.